Welcome to the deep dive. We all know that feeling, right? Wanting to really understand something complex, get deep into it, but without getting totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what we aim for here. And today we're diving into something really interesting based on material you shared, Chapter 20 of Professional Generalism.
That's right.
Yeah.
It tackles a question that comes up all the time. When things go wrong, where should we focus? On the people involved or, the bigger picture, the systems they're working in? And the sources we're looking at introduce this idea called the good individual, bad system concept, GBSE for short.
GBSC. Okay, let's break that down. So the core idea is basically that people generally mean well, they try to do a good job, bring good energy.
They're energy sponsors, as the text puts it, positive intent.
Right, but then the system, the environment, the rules, maybe the tools they can get in the way, they can cause problems, friction.
Ray.
Be energy antagonists.
Exactly. They like impossible deadlines, outdated software, confusing instructions, that kind of thing. It creates friction, maybe even harm.
So naturally, when things go pear-shaped, we tend to look at the system first, fix the process, not blame the person.
Yeah, it often feels like the more fundamental approach, like we're addressing the root cause of what the source calls differences in gaps, or DAGs. These performance issues.
Yes, okay.
Things like maybe poor training, bad management, lack of resources. It seems logical to fix those systemic things.
It avoids pointing fingers, too, which feels, well, fairer sometimes. But, okay, here's where it gets interesting, because the source throws a paradox at us. If people are part of the system, interacting with it, contributing to it, can we really say they have no responsibility when things go wrong systemically?
That's the first big paradox. Can you truly separate the individual from the system? The chapter argues pretty convincingly, I think, that you can't.
How so?
It says we are unities within systems and systems themselves. Think about it. Individual is a whole entity, a unity, but they're also operating within a larger system, and their actions create part of that system.
Okay, like the musician in the orchestra example you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. They are an individual unity, but also part of the orchestra system. So saying the system is bad, but the individuals are all blameless, it doesn't quite add up.
Right.
Collective responsibility and individual responsibility aren't opposites. The source stresses they often coexist. We all shape the system, for better or worse.
Okay, that makes sense. We're not just passive victims of the system, we're active participants. That's paradox one. What about the second one? You said that really made you pause.
Yeah, this one is quite the head-scratcher. If we accept GBSC, this idea that individuals are generally good and the system is the problem, well, what exactly can we change in a bad system?
What do you mean?
Well, think about the components of these socio-technical systems. The source lists them out. You've got the people, the technology, the rules and procedures, the products of activity, and the physical environment.
Okay.
Now, if we stick rigidly to GBSC, good individuals, bad system, then changing other people directly is kind of against the premise, isn't it?
Right, because they're inherently good. You can't just fix them.
Exactly. Maybe you can influence them, this energy transmission idea, but you can't fundamentally change their supposed good intent according to this model.
Okay, what about the tech? Can't we improve the technology?
We can try, but who designs, builds, maintains, and uses the technology?
People.
People. So improving the tech inevitably loops back to changing how humans interact with it or design it. Again, bumping up against the GBSC limitation.
And the physical environment.
Well, sure, we can make changes, but often our ability to drastically alter the physical world is limited. So what happens? People have to adapt.
Which brings it back to the individuals again.
Right back to them. So the source makes this really provocative point. If you follow GBSC strictly, it almost seems like efforts to investigate and improve are, well, pointless. In vain, as the text says.
Wow, that's, a bit bleak. Like a catch-22.
It certainly makes you question the simplicity of the good individual, bad system idea.
So GBSC also talks about whether problems are systemic or random. What's the deal there?
Right. The idea is to figure out if underperformance is a recurring pattern suggesting a systemic flaw or just a one-off unpredictable thing, which would be random.
And GBSC would say focus on fixing the systemic stuff.
Generally, yes. If it's systemic, find the root cause in the system. If it's random, GBSC might suggest leaving it alone, because trying to prevent random, unpredictable events often means trying to change individual behavior, which GBSC discourages.
I sense a but coming.
Yes. But the source points out something crucial. These labels, systemic and random, they're not concrete facts. They're interpretations, immaterial constructs,
Meaning,
meaning they totally depend on your perspective, your time frame, the scale you're looking at.
can you give an example?
Sure. The source uses one like this. Your phone keeps crashing. For you, using it every day, that feels very systemic, right? A flaw in the phone or the software.
Definitely. I'd be calling customer support, convinced it's a known issue.
But for the manufacturer, making millions of phones, your single faulty device, even a few hundred, might just be statistical noise, a random occurrence in their overall production. It doesn't necessarily signal a systemic design flaw to them, not immediately anyway.
Ah, okay. Perspective matters.
Hugely. Or think about employees. One person consistently underperforming might look systemic for that individual, but if it's just one person in a huge company, it might be seen as a random outlier from the company's perspective.
But what if lots of people underperform occasionally? Those look like random individual events.
Exactly. But taken together, that pattern could strongly indicate a systemic problem, like poor training, unrealistic targets, bad management.
So how we label it systemic or random really influences where we put our effort and money. It's a resource allocation thing.
Precisely. It often comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth investing in a major system overhaul for something perceived as random? Or do we only act when it hits a certain threshold and seems systemic?
Which raises ethical questions too, doesn't it? If we only fix things when enough people are affected.
It absolutely does. The perspective you take on systemic versus random isn't just analytical. It has real-world consequences for who gets help and what problems get solved.
This is all tying back to the idea of control, isn't it? Trying to manage these complex situations.
Yes, and the source cautions against the illusion of complete control. History shows that attempts to perfectly manage every part of a system or dictate every individual action, well, they don't tend to end well.
Right. You can't script everything.
You really can't. The focus, maybe, should be less on absolute control and more on managing our own energy, our own responsibilities, the unities trusted in us, as the source puts it, understanding our sphere of influence.
So thinking in these black and white terms, system versus individual, systemic versus random, it's useful up to a point, but we shouldn't get trapped by it.
That seems to be the key message. These frameworks help us analyze, but reality is often much messier and more interconnected.
Okay, so as we sort of bring this together, what are the main takeaways, the key reflections from this whole discussion on GBSC?
Well, first, definitely the deep interconnectedness. Individuals and systems aren't separate. They constantly shape each other. That's fundamental.
Got it.
Second, that systemic and random are relative. They depend entirely on your viewpoint, scale, and time frame. They're not fixed truths.
Right, the perspective angle.
Third, acknowledging the limits of control. We can influence, we can manage resources, but aiming for total command is likely futile. Focus on your sphere, your unities. And maybe fourth, just recognizing that these simple dichotomies, system or our individual, systemic or our random, they break down. We need a more nuanced, integrated view. Oh, and the ethical piece we touched on about resource allocation.
Okay, those are great reflections. But the source also offers concrete actions, right? How do we translate this into doing something?
Yeah, it moves from reflection to action. A key one is balancing systemic and individual efforts. Don't just pick one. Use tools like stakeholder analysis to see who's affected and how.
So a combined approach.
Exactly. And adopt systems thinking. Use methodologies that help you see the whole web of connections, not just isolated parts. Find those leverage points.
Makes sense. What else?
Prepare for uncertainty. Because systems are complex and control is limited, build resilience. Have backup plans. Contingency planning. Use tools like scenario planning. Get feedback loops going so you can adapt.
So be ready to adjust.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finally, always reflect and learn. When you try to make changes, see what worked, what didn't, and why. It's an ongoing process.
It really sounds like the big takeaway is moving beyond a simple fix the system or fix the person mindset. It's much more complex.
It really is. It requires a more sophisticated approach, understanding the interplay, the paradoxes, the limitations of our labels. It's about being thoughtful and effective, not just defaulting to the easiest answer.
So for everyone listening, maybe think about your own workplace, your teams. Have you seen this good individual, bad system idea play out?
Yeah, where does the focus usually go?
And how might thinking about these paradoxes, about the relativity of systemic issues, maybe shift how you approach problems or performance challenges?
And here's a final thought to chew on. In a world that seems increasingly focused, maybe rightly sometimes, on fixing systems, How do we make sure that the unique potential, the positive energy of individuals doesn't get lost in the shuffle? How do you personally navigate that? Ensure your contribution is seen and valued within the systems you're part of? Something to reflect on.